I now call this meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations to order. My name is Frida Martsalos, and I am the chair of the Standing Committee of Government Operations. Our meeting today is being broadcast and live streamed to respect physical distancing requirements. Some members and witnesses will be participating remotely. First of all, I would like to have our members of the committee introduce themselves.
Ron Bonatrush, MLA for Techo.
Rylan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Caitlin Cleveland, MLA Cam Lake.
Kevin Ryan from Lake.
And our staff.
April Taylor, Committee Advisor.
Glenn Rutland, Committee Clerk.
Thank you. Are there any other members participating remotely? I thought Steve was going to. Okay. Our first order of business today is to open our meeting with a prayer. I'll ask MLA Bonnet Rouge to offer the prayer.
Blessed Creator, we ask for your blessing and guidance, to have good thoughts, to see good things in a person, to hear good things from a person, to talk good to a person, so that we can walk with others in a good way. Blessed Creator.
Thank you, MLA Bonnet Rouge. Our next item is to review and the adoption of the agenda, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the agenda today, committee is receiving a presentation from Minister Simpson, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, and officials on official languages. There's also some correspondence. Following that, committee will move in camera to deal with a draft report, some draft correspondence as well.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Hearing no changes to the agenda, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? MLA Cleveland has moved adoption. The motion is in order. All those in favor? Okay. Motion is carried. Having reviewed and adopted the agenda, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Hearing none. The Official Languages Act requires that a committee of the Legislative Assembly conduct a review of the Act every 5 years. Committee is currently beginning this required review. Last week, committee heard from the Official Languages Commissioner. Today, I would like to welcome the Honorable R. James Simpson, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, and officials to our meeting today to discuss official languages. Over the next few months, committee will be engaging with language groups, Indigenous organizations, and other stakeholders as part of this review. We look forward to working together with the Minister to bring forward changes to this Act during this Assembly. The Minister will be providing opening remarks and a presentation. Following the presentation, committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions. I remind members and witnesses to wait until being called upon by the chair and to direct all remarks through the chair. So, Minister Simpson, the floor is yours for your opening remarks and presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to committee. I'm very pleased to provide the Standing Committee on Government Operations with a briefing on the Official Languages Act review. I'd like to thank you for reaching out to me so that we can come together to talk about the future of our territory's 11 official languages, the foundation on which cultures are built. I'm joined today by Ms. Rita Mueller, Deputy Minister, Mr. John McDonald, Assistant Deputy Minister of Education and Culture, Mr. Benoit Boutin, the Director of the Francophone Affairs Secretariat, Dr. Angela James, Director of Indigenous Languages and Education Secretariat, Ms. Julia Mott, Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister, and Ms. Rhona Sherigan, my Ministerial Special Advisor. We're very fortunate in the Northwest Territories to have such a rich diversity of languages and cultures. Languages reflect distinctive histories, protocols, and ceremonies linked to family, community, the land, and traditional knowledge from generations past and generations today. For the people of this land, the Dene, Métis, Inuvialuit, and NWT Cree people, these languages are the very core of their identity, hearts, and worldview. For this reason, the two overarching goals of the NWT Indigenous Languages Framework and Action Plan are revitalization, ensuring the languages are strengthened and celebrated, and access, meaning communication and services in the Indigenous languages. The purpose of both these goals is to develop and promote initiatives that lead us to the vision of an NWT where Indigenous languages are supported, respected, and thriving as languages of communication by all people. And this is what we've been working towards. You will see through your Official Languages Act review that the exciting work that my department is doing to support Indigenous communities who are reclaiming their languages, indigenizing our education system, and improving service delivery. The GNWT has also established standards of communication and service delivery in French. And with the efforts that are taking place to rebuild our Indigenous languages, I am encouraged that we will one day realize the vision of service delivery similar to what we see for French language services for all of our official languages. With committee's agreement, we have prepared a presentation that will be delivered together by Rita, Benoit, and Angela. I look forward to presenting any topic, I look forward to addressing any topics or questions the committee may have regarding this presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I would like to turn the presentation over to my Deputy Minister, Ms. Mueller.
Go ahead with the presentation, Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to you, Madam Chair, and to the committee for allowing us an opportunity to provide you with context and information and stories that will hopefully help to inform your work of the review of the NWT Official Languages Act. As you know, the NWT Official Languages Act gives official status to English, French, and 9 Indigenous languages. Minister Simpson, as the minister responsible for the Official Languages Act, has a responsibility to provide the general direction and coordination of GNWT language-related policies and programs for all 11 official languages. Through this presentation, we hope to provide committee with a flow of information that will allow you to see the whole story of NWT official languages as they relate to the statutory review of the Official Languages Act by speaking to the following order of bullets as outlined in the screen. Slide 3, sorry. If we could move to slide 4. In response to the last 3 standing committee reports on the Official Languages Act, ECE has responded with the introduction of new policies and programs, as you will see on slide 4. Most notably, in 2012, the Francophone Affairs Secretariat was established, and since then, French language services have improved significantly. And this continues through the implementation of the GNWT's strategic plan on French language, communications, and services from 2018 to 2023. As well, the Indigenous Languages and Education Secretariat, first known in 2014 as the Aboriginal Languages Secretariat, and then formally changed in 2016 as we know it today, is continually trying to improve and develop a sustainable model of Indigenous language service provision while increasing access to training opportunities. The updated draft Official Indigenous Languages Guidelines Manual, which highlights how to deliver Indigenous language services, outlines the responsibility of GNWT departments and agencies to improve the use of Indigenous languages in all GNWT workplaces. As well, the GNWT continues to offer bilingual bonuses for any employee who speaks more than one official language in an official capacity as related to their job. And we also recognize Indigenous languages as well as Francophone language through celebrated months to try to highlight and promote these services by the GNWT. If I could ask you to move to slide 5. The provisions of the Official Languages Act lay out obligations of government institutions to official languages, communications, and services. The Minister Simpson, as the Minister of ECE, is also the minister responsible for the Official Languages Act. And really what this means is he's responsible for the policies and programs as related to all official languages, takes advice from the NWT language boards, promotes the use of languages in government, tables an annual report on the official languages, assesses the status of each of our official languages, evaluates the effectiveness of programs and policies and programs that are offered, and encourages the maintenance and revitalization of Indigenous languages, both through programs and through education. As well, there's a language commissioner that is established under the Official Languages Act, and this position is appointed for 4 years by the Legislative Assembly. We also currently have 2 NWT language boards, which were established in 2004 through the Act, and they consist of representatives of all the languages, and these individuals are nominated by their language communities. They also have the responsibility to evaluate the Official Languages Act, as well as to advise and make recommendations to the minister. So with your permission, Madam Chair, I would ask now that Benoit Boutin takes over the next several slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning, members. In the years 2000, there's been a number of events before the court between the GNWT and the Francophone community. And in 2009, that was the final step following the Supreme Court of Canada on the ruling about the dispute between the GNWT and the Francophone community. So following the order, one of the main order was to develop a strategic plan to guide the government in the implementation of French language services. And that plan was developed in collaboration and partnership with the Fédération Franco-Ténoise. It became very clear with the magnitude of the court order that the GNWT didn't have the machinery to implement such court orders. And that's why in 2012, the GNWT decided to establish a Francophone Affairs Secretariat. It's a central type agency to support department, board, and agency. So the following step after the development of the strategic plan was really to create the secretariat. As you see in the graph, most of the activity of this Francophone Secretariat is not within ECE. So maybe if we can go, not to the next slide, but there's a graph beside the graph on the left, please. Thank you very much. So, and then as you see with the dot, most of the work is done with all the department agency, including the HSS system, the health authorities and the department, and recently with the COVID Secretariat. We provide advice and support to all the department to implement the strategic plan. We report, we evaluate, we're doing audit as well. Another element, we provide French translation services. It's centralized at the Secretariat with over 2 million words per year of translation. And we provide services to Service TNO. It's a one-stop shop that in Yellowknife, and that provides services, could be fishing permit, hunting license, marriage license, liquor license. So that's a number of services. As you see, it's on behalf of all the departments. We manage a language agreement with Canada, and also one of our key roles is to be a liaison with the Francophone community. If we can go to the next slide, please. Number 7. Thank you very much. Following the first strategic plan, we developed in 2013 the first standards. So the standards are really the day-to-day guide to all the department about what they have to translate, what they have to do, how they do it. Also, it was a key to have a monitoring, evaluation, and accountability framework, the first one in 2015. And following that, we had a significant evaluation and audit of the first strategic plan. And it has been done by an independent party, that was the company Grant Thornton. And the recommendation was used to develop the second GNWT strategic plan approved. It's the current plan for until 2023. We regularly update the standard, and that's the work we do with the department when we discuss, and we're doing some fine tuning. And finally, recently, that was the revised monitoring, evaluation, accountability framework. That's very key to establish a strong accountability. What department are doing? Are they following their operating plan? Are they doing their requirement? What they are doing with the funding? That's a key of the MOA. If we can go to the next slide, please. On the budget, it's $5.5 million per year for all the department. It's for French translation, paying for service TNO, advertisement in L'Aquilon and Radio Taiga, all the resources offer and deliver for French language services, print material, brochure, form, certificate, and also the cost for monitoring and evaluation of the strategic plan. Next slide, please. And the last for the French, it's statistic. As you see quickly, from 81 to 2016, roughly there's 4,300 people able to speak French in the NWT. 3/4 of those people live in Yellowknife, and the other are most in Fort Smith, Hay River, and Inuvik. That the increase, there's a number of factors, but let's not forget the immersion, the importance of immersion school in the NWT, first French language, and also the population that's increased. So that's the last slide for French. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and member.
Jonathan, good morning. Madam Chair and the Standing Committee. I'll speak now about the Indigenous languages of the Northwest Territories. And before I do, though, I would just want to make note of the slide with the raven and the coyote on it. And what we have to be careful with in the Northwest Territories is some of the very misleading comparisons between the French and the Indigenous languages. We know that French and Indigenous languages in the NWT have many similarities. They have their histories, they have their challenges, and they both fight very valiantly to ensure that their languages and their culture are alive and vibrant in the Northwest Territories. But as well, the French and the Indigenous languages also have differences, and this is where many of the misleading comparisons comes about. As Benoit shared with you, the French focus on their service delivery. As well, in the history of language and cultural erosion, it's more apparent and profound for the Indigenous languages. And of course, with the Indigenous languages, our focus is on revitalization for the 9 NWT Indigenous languages, and that is our main comparison. So as I said, in the NWT, there often are these misleading comparisons between French language and the 9 Indigenous languages. And although there are similarities, as outlined in the slide, the fact is there's also those major differences that play a huge factor in the current situation of these languages and services. And this is where the trickster shapeshifts and creates misleading comparisons, problems, misconceptions, and misunderstanding about the NWT French and Indigenous languages and their differences. And I'll just talk a little bit about those differences and make these points clear. So for the French language and history, they started in 1982 with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which established the constitutional rights and official status of English and French languages in Canada. And then throughout the early part of the 2000s, the NWT French community, as Benoit described, fought for those rights to communications and services in French. And it was brought to the courts. The courts provided direction to the GNWT in terms of services and communications. And as a result of that, that gives the French a very good news story. And we need to celebrate that good news story because French language communication and services are available and monitored throughout the GNWT very closely through the Francophone Affairs Secretariat. However, the Indigenous languages history and challenges presents a different story that immediately causes many NWT people to prickle and even to get upset or angry. And they attempt to combat the French language against the Indigenous languages, thus creating that negativity, the problems and misconceptions with the trickster very much at play. The issue is like really a big pink elephant in the room, and it needs to be named right from the get-go. The French language communication and services in the NWT are different from the Indigenous language communication and services, with different stages of development. The French are further ahead than the Indigenous languages, which is no one's fault except history. As we know, as a result of the last century's dark chapter of colonization, of racism and residential schooling system, Indigenous peoples, languages, and cultures were nearly eradicated. Many of the wrongs were revealed and lessons learned and these have been highlighted in the 2011 United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People and the highly publicized legal battle in the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation of Canada report, with the GNWT committing to address the TRC calls to action and the UNDRIPS articles, which speak to the preservation and the revitalization of Indigenous languages in the NWT. So today for Indigenous languages, the challenge to deliver communications and services remains difficult, which is due to the century-old erosion of the Indigenous languages. As such, the Indigenous Languages and Education Secretary in many situations, we're playing catch-up with the language revitalization, as well as trying to improve language service delivery at the same time. All of this is further challenged in the NWT because there are 9 official Indigenous languages, which need to be strengthened and revitalized and promoted. The issue always comes to the forefront when people speak about Indigenous languages, communication, and services, when they speak about the 1997 disbandment of the Language Bureau and the decentralization of Indigenous languages, interpreters, and translation services. However, right now, history places Indigenous languages in a catch-22 position, in that everyone wants to receive Indigenous languages services and have service delivery to be on par with French. But we have to almost plan backwards, or if you like, paddle upriver or against the current. Because if we want Indigenous languages services and more interpreter translators, broadcasters, instructors, mentors, we have to create the systems to make that happen, which means developing systemic planning, researching, and developing of programs and services and Indigenous language initiatives. This systemic plan is highlighted in the GNWT's 2007 Indigenous Language Framework called the Shared Responsibility, and the accompanying action plan, which is a 4-year blueprint for how we're going to accomplish those 2 overarching goals, which is number 1, revitalization, as well as access to Indigenous languages services, or if you like, service delivery. Right now in the Northwest Territories, with the Indigenous language revitalization efforts going full tilt ahead, we have the following initiatives that are in place and even completed. For example, the Certificate of Indigenous Language Revitalization, that partnership with Aurora College and University of Victoria, which had 10 graduates from that certificate program, is completed. It completed in March of 2020. As well, the Canadian Indigenous Language and Literacy Development Institute courses offered from the University of Alberta. We offered 3 sessions of those courses, altogether about 9 courses, with many, many Indigenous languages advocates and leaders taking those courses, largely based in linguistics. As well, we have delivered the 2019-20 Mentor Apprenticeship Program, and it's being evaluated and expanded. As well, we're moving into now the Indigenous Language Diploma Program, starting with the research and development for the post-secondary delivery. And as you know, Minister Simpson launched the Our Languages curriculum. It's implemented in the NWT schools, and the accompanying Indigenous Languages and Education Handbook called Our People, Our Land, Our Ways, Our Languages, linking it right back to the Our Languages curriculum that is being implemented in the NWT schools. As well, we'll be launching a very exciting new Indigenous language campaign called Learn, Speak, Live Our Languages, which ties all of the initiatives into one campaign, looping back to our cutting-edge Our Languages curriculum. With the NWT schools, not only the school students, but also the upcoming MAP apprentices using the same language proficiency assessment tools to monitor and develop their language learning processes. And Indigenous language service delivery is also happening with the update of the Indigenous languages guidelines being updated, with the hiring of a new Indigenous languages service project coordinator, with the upcoming support and training events being planned for the new year for interpreters and translators, and as well the Indigenous Languages Revitalization Scholarship Program that is opening up and being offered to the interpreter and translators who are interested in pursuing more training to develop their trade. So the journey for Indigenous languages revitalization and service delivery will be a long one, and it really requires us to practice steadfastness, strategy, collaboration, and vision. But the Indigenous people are very resilient with true grit, having withstood the last century of near obliteration, and will come back full circle with their languages and cultures strong and vibrant as they were long ago. Next slide, please. And you can show the next little graph as well. Thank you. And so how will we do that? Well, we work largely through our secretariat, our Indigenous Languages and Education Secretariat, which is fully staffed with 8 positions. So essentially we have a whole staff, but 3 staff members, the Indigenous Language and Culture Coordinators, and they're very much responsible for the implementation of the curriculum and the ILE, Indigenous Language and Education workshops happening in the schools. And they focus on ensuring that these in-servicing are happening not only with the curriculum, but also with the handbook on how to carry out indigenizing education promising practices in the school. As well, we have 2 project coordinators, and they're primarily focused on project management of the NWT Languages Framework and Action Plan and all aspects related to the Canada NWT Agreement on Indigenous Languages. We also have a regional linguist who offers linguistic supports to our partners, and then we have a finance and admin assistant. As well as myself, we have the Director of Indigenous Languages and Education Secretariat, who reports to the ECE Assistant Director, as it's indicated on the slide. And what's really interesting about the IELTS is that we have a really unique organizational structure, because our mandate and our policy spans 2 branches of ECE through the following policy documents. So we go on the culture, heritage, and languages side because of our NWT Indigenous Languages Framework and Action Plan. And then on the school side for the JK-12 school programs, we have our NWT JK-12 Indigenous Languages and Education Policy. So the Secretariat provides support to enhance, protect, revitalize, and promote the 9 official Indigenous languages throughout the Northwest Territories. And some of the programs and services, as I mentioned earlier, is what we do is we support and provide funding for the Indigenous language government, for the Indigenous governments to develop and implement their own Indigenous language plans. We support and provide funding for Indigenous language broadcasting societies and community radio stations. We also provide the administration and funding support to the NWT official languages boards. And we have a partnership with the NWT Literacy Council to really celebrate Indigenous Languages Month that takes place annually in February. As well, you know that the Secretariat, the Indigenous Languages and Education Secretariat, is working in partnership with Aurora College, the University of Victoria, the Indigenous governments to promote and fund initiatives for Indigenous language revitalization at the post-secondary level, incentivizing learning through the Indigenous language scholarships, as well as through community-based mentor apprenticeship programs and the upcoming immersion programs that we're developing and the professional development. So as well, in the upcoming months, we have 2, as I mentioned, the 2 goals of the action plan is revitalization and service delivery, or access. So in the upcoming months, well, actually it's actually in the upcoming weeks now, there will be 2 new staff members joining the Secretariat. Number 1 is the new Mentor Apprenticeship Project Coordinator, which will lead the revitalization efforts, and as well the new Indigenous Languages Services Project Coordinator, which will lead the Indigenous Language Service Delivery initiatives. So those are exciting positions that are coming available ASAP. As well, the next slide is, if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the funding. As we know, in the Northwest Territories, we have a total for Indigenous language spending is $21 million, and $5 of that million comes from the federal government through the Indigenous Languages Agreement, and the GNWT also supplements $15.1 million for Indigenous languages services. Next slide. As well, we have some statistics to show us where the Indigenous languages are at. And in many situations, because of the efforts that are happening with revitalization, the perceived decline and disappearance of the Indigenous languages, which have been a very strong matter of public concern, has resulted in much discussion around the Indigenous languages, both in government and public. But these slides here provide, some very important nuances that are happening with the Indigenous languages and some good news, if you like. In the first graph, we have the actual numbers of individuals to converse and track over a 25-year period through the NWT community surveys. The last survey was taken in, the data from the last survey of 2014 shows that many of the Indigenous languages have a modest uptake than from the previous census. The 2019 numbers have not been posted yet by NWT Statistics, but we hope to receive those within the coming days. And I believe that those will show that same kind of positive uptake that we like to say is a good news story for Indigenous languages. In the second graph, you see that the percentage change shows more tremendous variability among the numbers as they have seemed to improve. So from 1999 to 2000, the numbers drop, which is, of course, a little bit troubling. But from 2009 to 2014, the growth in speakers have exceeded the overall population growth for the first time in a recent number of decades. And we'd like to think that the good news stories as a result of the revitalization efforts that are in the past and moving forward in the future. Next slide, please. This last slide shows us, as well as in this third graph, is a further breakdown of the data by age group from the 2016 Canadian census, reveals another uptake in speakers in the earlier years and confirms the progress from the previous community survey data. So really, we'd like to share a little bit of that slight upturn in the good news story for Indigenous languages in the Northwest Territories. Next slide. And the way that we're proceeding with our Indigenous Languages Act is, and the framework and the action plan, which speak directly about revitalization and language access, is that as we're moving forward with completing the actions that are set forth in the action plan, whose various categories are described in the blue and the pink and the yellow box that's attached there, it just shows us how we're moving forward to reach the shared vision that has been articulated in the past standing committee reports and the other engagement processes in the intervening years. I just want to let you know that when we did create the framework and the action plan, we very closely, intentionally listened to the voices of the past when elders and community advocates and leaders spoke to us about what to put in the 2017 framework and the 2018 action plan. So we very much consulted the past reports, the 2003 Scrolla Review called One Land, Many Voices, the 2009 Scogel Review calling the Reality Check, Securing a Future for the Official Language of the Northwest Territories, as well as the previous 2010 NWT Languages Plan. So those are all of the components that make up the framework and the action plan, having very much been informed by the past reviews, not only from SCOGA, but also from that Standing Committee Review of the Official Languages in 2003, the Scrolla Report, if you like. Next slide. So we'd like to also share a little bit about what's happening in the federal government. As you know, as many of us know, the Federal Indigenous Languages Act has been put into law, and it will have probably implications on the NWT Official Languages Act. The federal government is in consultation with in the new phase leading up to the new Commissioner for Indigenous Languages at the federal level. and as well the impacts of the current arrangement with the federal government right now remain unknown. As you know, the Federal Indigenous Languages Act represents the federal government's commitment to address the actions 13 to 15 of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. And it'll be led, as I said, by that new Commissioner for Indigenous Languages and 3 directors representing the First Nations peoples, the Métis people, and the Inuit people. And the federal government has really committed to substantial dollars over a 5-year period from 1920 to 23-24, 333 million thereabout. And as well, to set up the Commissioner's office, they're investing 115.7 million for the ongoing O&M. So we really do, in the Northwest Territories, that federal act and the new Commissioner's office and all that's happening at the federal level, we really anticipate hopefully new funding to come online that will flow directly to what we expect is to the Indigenous governments and organizations in a nation-to-nation relationship. And while we don't know the financial implications to the Secretariat, the initial funding model proposed by Canadian Heritage holds the annual federal funding steady at 5.9 million, and we continue to work very closely with Canadian Heritage on the upcoming 2021 Indigenous Languages Agreement, and then the negotiations going forward from 2021. So next slide, please. And so we come forward from ECE, from the Minister, with several recommendations for amendments to the Official Languages Act. There are 3 of them. One is to improve the functioning of the language boards. The other is to update the legislation. And the third is to revise the regulations and the guidelines for Indigenous languages. And so what that means is that there really has been long-standing housekeeping amendments that have not been made yet to the Official Languages Act. EC recommends that these be addressed in the upcoming 2020 SCOGO review, just as follows, as I'm saying. First of all, to improve the functioning of the language board. The first recommendation that concentrates in that area is to amalgamate the 2 language boards. In 2009, SCOGO review recommended the amalgamation of the Official Languages Board and the Aboriginal Language Revitalization Board that were established under the OLA in 2004. And then in 2015, the boards of both those boards agreed to move forward with board amalgamation. So that's one housekeeping item that we need to attend to. As well, we really recommend that we extend the board members' terms from 2 years to 4 years with staggered years of service. And what we're finding is that the 2-year term is not enough to get the nominations in. And then very quickly we meet with the language board members in our meetings called the Official Languages Board meetings. And then before too long, the 2 years is over with the nomination period starting again. So we really need to extend that term. As well, more housekeeping items under the recommendations that we're providing deal with updating the language of the legislation, i.e. to update the term South Slavey to Denijatiye, which has been accepted by many the Decho region, as well as to correct the orthography of Tlicho with the proper diacritics, as well as to update the reference to Aboriginal to Indigenous, and as well as to correct any other nomenclature changes identified by language communities. So these revised regulations, the last one is, of course, to revise the regulation and guidelines for Indigenous languages. And then that will involve the updating of the schedule of representative organizations for the Indigenous language communities, revise the areas of significant demand if necessary, and revise the guidelines manual as we spoke about. With that, committee, I'd like to thank you for your time. Masi, Marsicho, Kwayanaini, and from there I'll hand the presentation over to Minister Simpson.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Benoit and Rita, and thank you, committee. I think there's a lot of good work going on in this area. There are some areas of government that haven't been reviewed for quite a number of years, but this is one area where there's a lot of work that's been done in the past few years in recognition of the concerns that I think many of the committee members have expressed as well. So thank you to everyone for the presentation, and we're open to any questions or comments from committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. I will now open the floor to questions. Are there any questions? Emily Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess my first concern, and first I want to thank the staff for all their work, and I think a lot of the things that have been said here are the right things, but I do think this is one of those areas where we can truly leave a legacy, and there's some exciting work to be done. There's also seems to be some federal dollars, which always helps. But my concern is if we review the Official Languages Act and we have a service kind of oriented view to it and not a revitalization view, we're going to end up just spending millions of dollars on translation, on guaranteeing people services in Indigenous languages. We're going to make all of our current language speakers work really hard and be employed, but we probably won't at the end of the day create new language speakers. And I think that's one of the problems with the Official Languages Act is it's a rights-based, service-oriented act. And so what I would like to do is, we also happen to be amending the Education Act, is really look at how these two can work together. Under the Charter, French language speakers have a right to French language schools, should there be sufficient demand. I believe we can create a similar right for Indigenous languages in the Northwest Territories. I also think we could combine that with kind of a standing offer to Indigenous governments to take on education and have that backstop. So that's kind of my overarching vision. And I think additionally, we have to go one step farther and extend rights, not just to Indigenous language speakers, but people who would like their children to become Indigenous language speakers, such that, you know, if you don't speak the language yourself, you often don't have a right, but we have this entire couple generations who I'm sure would like their children to have the right to, you know, have access to an education in that Indigenous language. So if the minister could just speak to whether ECE is willing to create a right to Indigenous language schools. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Simpson?
Thank you. And, you know, we're talking about two different acts here. One is the Education Act, and I appreciate what the member is saying in that this act the Official Languages Act is very service-oriented, and it's about providing services. And I think the ask is to guarantee other services, right, namely the service to education in Indigenous languages, and that could come at the expense, perhaps, of the revitalization effort. So, you know, right now, schools are encouraged to offer immersion programs, to offer Indigenous second languages programs, and 42 of them offer the second language, and 4 of them offer immersion in the early grades. So that ability is there. The support to do that is there, and that's the ultimate goal. In terms of the Education Act, it is recognized that, I recognize that we need to do more to indigenize education, that there are governments who, you know, through their agreements have the ability to draw down education if they wish, and we need to take that into account. And I hope that while committee does this review, that they do focus on those things, because there is a lot of interplay between the two of them. And I can just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
MLA Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I guess to start, my first question would be, there's a lot of talk about developing different programs, and I get very excited when we start talking about certificates in Indigenous languages and in interpretation and translation and creating new language speakers. Can the minister speak a little bit to how these opportunities are going to be made available to people throughout communities so that access to Indigenous languages does not become a socioeconomic barrier for people who may not have the opportunity to learn their traditional language? Thank you.
Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, and I'd like Dr. James to provide her input on this, because we're well aware that you can't revitalize language if you're not working with the communities, with the people who will be speaking it. So I'd ask Dr. James to provide a comment. Thank you.
Marcy, Minister Simpson, Marcy, for the question. As I described, there were quite a few of the Indigenous language revitalization initiatives that we're moving forward on in the Secretariat, and many of them are exciting. The last exciting one that Minister Simpson had referred to was the Our Languages curriculum and the launch of that curriculum. What a milestone event that curriculum has been. It's been a long time standing, and it has had extensive pilots with involvement from Indigenous language elders and leaders and advocates. And so I don't want to underestimate and take away from the celebration of that launch of the Our Languages curriculum. And so with that curriculum, though, we are allowed to go not only to provide Indigenous language curriculum abilities in the school system, but as well that curriculum becomes the impetus, if you like, for other Indigenous initiatives that are moving forward. The first one that I want to make mention of, and I just kind of touched on it in the speaking notes, was about the upcoming 2021 mentor apprenticeship program. So that program is being launched right now based on the evaluation of the last 2019-20 last year's pilot that we did. And so this will provide language learning opportunities to those who would like to be a part of we call it the MAP, it's Mentor Apprenticeship Program. And this will be launched in, actually today all the advertisements are coming forward for those interested learners who want to learn their language. We're offering it to 6 different language learning groups with Inuvialuktun, with the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, Gwich'in with the Gwich'in Tribal Council, Sawtu with the Sawtu Dene Council, Dinijati'e with the Decho First Nations, Tlicho with the Tlicho government, as well as Dinisutlina with the Aquicho Territory government. So that is one exciting initiative moving forward that will provide access to all learners when they're interested. The other one that another one that's very interesting that builds on MAP is that we are in the research and development phase of a Indigenous Languages Diploma program. So for 2 years we'll be in research, and that diploma program is really an adult immersion diploma program that will concentrate on a proposed or a pilot 3-year delivery, with the first year really concentrating on building and developing people, interested learners, interested speakers, building on developing their Indigenous language fluency levels. And so that is going to be accessible to all learners who are interested in following an Indigenous language diploma, adult immersion diploma program. And so in the first 2 years, as I said, they'll learn their language. And so when they do have increased language learning levels, what will they do with that? Well, that will be a part of the 3rd year of the diploma, which is creating career paths. And what are those career paths made up of? So we would like to have with the increased fluency of those Indigenous languages, start to think about careers as interpreter translators, as broadcasters, as instructors, as teachers or mentors. So those are 2 huge initiatives that we're moving forward on that will provide those opportunities and make them available for all learners who are interested in pursuing these initiatives. Marcy, Minister Simpson.
That you're okay? Do you want to follow up? Okay, go ahead, MLA Cleveland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister and Dr. James for that response. I guess my next question is in regards to support for Indigenous governments. Right now with the Liberal government, there's a substantial amount of money that's been allocated towards the revitalization of Indigenous languages. Earlier this year, we saw a significant pot of, I believe, $333 million over 5 years for Indigenous languages. And given that our pot is smaller than that for Indigenous languages in the Northwest Territories, I'm wondering what support the Department of Education is providing to Indigenous governments that have limited number of staff to be able to draft applications for grants like this and to provide that administrative grant writing support so that our Indigenous governments can access some of these pots that are currently available with the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd also like Dr. James to answer this one.
Marcy, Minister. Marcy, Chairperson. Essentially for the support to Indigenous governments, we have the Secretariat has a very close and healthy relationship with the regional Indigenous governments. We help them in supporting as well as advising and counseling them on their regional Indigenous language plans. From our fund of monies, from the 5.9 million, really 5 million goes out to the Indigenous governments for their own plans. And part of those plans, if they do decide to seek more government support from the federal government, they're certainly able to do those kinds of things. And so what we do is we have regular communication with the regional Indigenous governments, and we provide support and counsel. And so if they are interested in applying for more government funds, or at the federal level especially, we can certainly help them with those proposal writing initiatives, or help them to get in touch with the right people and guide them and support them in any of these kinds of initiatives to gain support of those federal dollars. So that's as a result of that close relationship with the Secretariat and the Indigenous governments. Marcy.
Thank you. MLA O'Reilly.
Merci tout le monde pour ton travail. Thanks to everybody for your work. I note that there's been a couple of previous reviews conducted of the Official Languages Act by the Standing Committee on Government Operations back in 2009, 2014, and there were recommendations made for legislative change. But it looks like the last time the Act actually went through any kind of legislative change was back in 2004. So I guess I am seeking some reassurance from the minister that we're not going to go through another review of the Official Languages Act and result with the same act at the end of the day. I know we have, we're down 1 year already, and the committee's going to take some time to do its work, but I guess I'd like to get some assurance from the minister that when the committee recommends legislative change, that work is actually going to result in a bill coming forward to the House to make the kinds of changes that were presented to us here, and additional ones perhaps that the committee will review. So that's my question, Madam Chair, and I know that Mr. Norn apparently has some questions that he'd like to ask as well. Okay, that's my question. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, there is an intent. We do have a few items, as mentioned by Angela, that the department does want to change. So there is an intention to open up this act. And there were a number of recommendations made by the committees, and those were all, and I can't recall the number, but there was quite a few of them, and those were all reviewed by the language boards prior to the development of the current framework and action plan, so that they were considered in the actions that the departments are undertaking, not necessarily, obviously, in the legislation. I think there were almost 300 actions, and so there was a painstaking effort to ensure that they were all looked at and all actioned in any way they could be. But I can ask my Deputy Minister for some more information on that one. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. Yes, as the Minister mentioned, so prior to the development of the action plan, the framework and the action plan to support Indigenous languages, the Official Languages and the Aboriginal Languages Board, in particular the Aboriginal Languages Board, looked at all previous recommendations that had been made by committee, all of them. And basically over the course of a year it took, is to look at all of them, really determine if any action had been done or what had taken place after that recommendation, what were still outstanding, and based on, as Dr. James pointed out, the current state of Indigenous languages, or many Indigenous languages in the Northwest Territories, mapped out which what focus and what actions they felt would make the biggest difference in really revitalizing and moving forward in a meaningful way the recommendations that help to revitalize and increase access to Indigenous languages. So that work was done, and part of the commitment in developing this shared responsibility that has a very appropriate name in recognizing that with anything related to Indigenous languages, the regional Indigenous language groups, as well as the Indigenous governments, need to have a vital voice in agreeing with and helping to be partners in moving those actions forward. So that is that result, transpired in the framework and the action plan, which is regularly reviewed. And, as I think, or as we tried to share with you of late, some really fundamental work has been done, which I think when you go back and look at the previous recommendations, we are moving work forward in the right direction. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister.
Supplementary, O'Reilly.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that review of what happened with previous committee recommendations. I guess what I'm seeking, though, is a clear commitment from the Minister that this review is actually going to result in legislative changes, whereas the two previous reviews did not. So can the Minister provide some assurance that there will be legislative changes brought forward to the Official Languages Act during the life of this Assembly, partly based on what the Department wants, but perhaps also reflecting what the committee may come up with? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I can't commit to that. I know the member said perhaps based on what the committee recommends. I can't commit to implementing changes that the committee recommends without seeing them. I mean, I think that's just bad legislating to blindly agree to something like that. But I do respect the work of committee, and I think that we're at an opportune time right now to review this act because of all the work that's been going on and because of the interest in this area. So I'm confident the committee will bring forward some very good suggestions, and that I'm hoping that they will be integrated into the Act and for the benefit of all residents of the territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Emily Bonnet-Rouge.
Merci, Madame Chair. Yeah, I'd like to commend the department for working on the languages directorate and seeing to it that they are being brought to fruition, especially the First Nations languages, and also recognize the French languages initiatives also. I believe the former Official Languages Commissioner of the NWT says, to really increase the representation and the awareness of the Indigenous languages, to bring it to the same level as what the French language is having, the success they're having in the Northwest Territories. I'm wondering if, because I don't know if it could be brought into the Act of any type, if any thoughts were given to, if there's any correlation to education learning outcomes being so low in our communities because of the languages being introduced to children from JK to 3, because I know someone else was telling me that, well, language is critical to learning from the early ages of birth to about 6 years of age. I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts to that, and if there was ever any evaluations to determine challenges being faced by the instructors and quite possibly the students. Masi.
Mr. Simpson?
Thank you for that. And, we have, it's known that there's a gap in student outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in the territory and between those in the larger centers and the smaller communities. But I wouldn't attribute that to, immersion programs in Indigenous languages for young children. And we have immersion programs or even French first language programs. And those students, we don't see any sort of deficits in learning there. So I think there's a number of other factors at play. Perhaps for some of the specifics on the first language or immersion programs, I can pass it off to my deputy minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. So just to build on what the Minister is saying, as far as the existing or current, the current immersion programs that we have in the NWT and in several schools, we do our best as a secretariat to work with them and provide whatever training, resources that we can to help them and to, ensure that they're the best programs for those young children. And they're all really right now as first language immersion programs for the young children from junior kindergarten to about grade 3. And as the minister said as well, admittedly, we don't have enough evaluation. There's not very many programs that are doing immersion, but I can't say that we have enough data to correlate overall academic achievement of those children. What we do know, though, from research and working with many different partners across Canada, whether it be University of Victoria, which is a leader in Indigenous language acquisition and revitalization, or it be with our partners in OISE and the University of Toronto, what they tell us is that children who are exposed to multiple languages from an early age on, from birth on, actually tend to do much, much better academically than others. And so the idea of both our immersion and or second language Indigenous language programs in school is to expose children to that second language and preferably the language of their community. And with that, we do believe, because of that research related to multiple language learning, that children will benefit and, in fact, will excel in a variety of ways when they're exposed to multiple languages. But one of the things that, a decision of whether a school offers the immersion program is really up to that education authority to do so. And one of the continued challenges, and that's why we have worked for the past several years and really been determined to develop our languages curriculum, was because we were hearing from both immersion and second language Indigenous language instructors that we needed a more formal, comprehensive way for them to teach language proficiency to their children, and that it had to be based and grounded on everyday language use that was modeled and used with those children regardless of what grade they are. And that is very much what the Our Languages curriculum and all of the supporting resources, documents that go with it for teachers, for the instructors, as well as the training tries to do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Supplementary, MLA Bronnenbush.
Merci, Madam Chair, and merci to the Minister and the Deputy Minister for their thoughts on this whole process. I know they both recognize that they currently don't have any type of evaluations, which has also been noted by the Auditor General's report on education. Things like that are in my mind, it's kind of important to have these evaluations. That way, if the program is being successful or if there's any challenges being faced by the instructors, and perhaps the students through parent-student interviews. And we can, it's that we throw programs out there, we throw funds out there at a problem, and we never ever go to check to see if there's any success at all, or is it just like a lip service? Here, just do it anyways. If we want to be successful at anything, we really have to do our follow-ups on them. We're throwing the money at them. And it's upon the Department of Education to ensure that. I thought I'd make that comment in that area anyways. The other thing I just wanted to touch upon too is there was some stickler points to the use of the Indigenous title, when it was Aboriginal before it went Indigenous. Now, we don't know what the term Indigenous means anymore. Because to many people, and we've been hearing it, take the NWT for example, we got First Nations groups, First Nations people. And then when you use the word Indigenous, say you're Indigenous to the Northwest Territories, that can be anybody, not necessarily First Nations. It can be open to anybody, it's open to interpretation. I'm Indigenous to the Northwest Territories. That's why I'm wondering if there was any consultations with many of the First Nations peoples in the NWT on the terminology used for them. When you're moving away from First Nations, the word First Nations people, that's an identity right there. We know First Nations, who they are. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, Masi.
Thank you, and I believe that would be more for the Department of the Executive and Indigenous Affairs. I believe they're the ones who dictate what terminology the government uses. And I know there is some confusion with human resources might use the term Indigenous for another reason, but in terms of the Official Languages Act, there is significant consultation with communities about the terminology that's being used, and Dr. James did mention it, that one of the changes that we want to make to the Act is to update the terminology so it does reflect what the actual communities want in there. So, updating from terms like South Slavey to the actual term used by the people. So for this Act, we do consult, and we make those changes when we can. And regarding the evaluation, I'll say that the Our Languages curriculum that was rolled out is a result of hearing from teachers, hearing from communities about what we need to do and how we need to better support Indigenous language instructors. And it was, I believe it was a 5-year pilot program. So it has been years in the making, it has been refined based on experiences. So it's not something that we just threw out there. It's something that we worked with educators to help develop, and there was endless feedback on it. So it really was very collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to now go to one of our remote MLAs, Mr. Norn.
Yeah, Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, Te Marcy Choestan, and when I said there was, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the Minister and his senior staff for the presentation. And I have a few comments and a couple of questions. Just so you know what I have in front of me, I'm looking at a few documents. I have the Truth and Reconciliation document up in front of me, a couple of previous official language reports I have in front of me, and of course the presentation. And I noticed something that really concerned me. And I was really lucky, growing up myself. Just to give you a quick background on me, that I was raised by great grandparents who spoke Chippewa, in the house, and growing up with that. And they always told me, your language is where it's part of your heart. It's how we get our strength. And I always remember that, and for me, I try to speak as where I can when I can. I think I probably could do a little better in the House and in meetings and whatnot. But yeah, I just thought I'd say that. But going back, I just want to say a few things about the presentation. I did notice a really concerning trend like that on slide 13, where it was a downward trend. We're getting less and less speakers out there, and I talking with a lot of our instructors, they're saying, I've been hearing a lot of our instructors, Steve, I'm getting up there in age, even some of our interpreters, like we got to start recruiting some younger blood out there to get people out there to promoting our language, to preserving our language, and like I said, I want to see, that's where I want to kind of see this go, this movement, towards more of, getting more of our younger generation to get up there and take over for our people that are going to be retiring and are not going to be able to do this much longer. So that's something I'd say. I did have some questions though. On slide 16, I know there's a point there. There's the dynamic between. I'm just going to pull it up. Just bear with me for a second here. About the dynamic between the federal Indigenous Languages Act that was put in law last year, and they're looking for a new commissioner. But there's a comment there, and it says the impacts on our current arrangements with the federal government remain unknown. Can I get the minister just to expand a little bit about that? Is there something with funding or some sort of legislative disconnect there? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Minister Simpson?
Thank you. So our current funding with the agreement with the federal government ended on March 31st of this year, and we have been funding internally until we sign a new agreement, and it's expected we'll have a one-year agreement signed to carry us to the end of this year for the same amount. But going forward, it's, I believe, unclear to us exactly what the federal government is planning. Perhaps I can hand it to Dr. Angela James, who's been more involved in some of these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Simpson and Madam Chair. Is that, as a matter of fact, just this weekend I was completed the package that's headed to the minister's way to talk about the Indigenous Languages Agreement and how we hope to take steps towards the federal government and the negotiations for this year, the year 2021. And we have, as we know that the federal government has agreed to a one-year new agreement for Indigenous languages and the initiatives. And so we are moving ahead on that agreement, and it's coming right around the corner to the leadership. And with that one-year agreement, it's remaining at the same funding levels of 5.9. So that's good news. But as well, regarding the federal negotiations, it is as it says. It's we still don't know what the feds are exactly going to do, except we do know that they're coming forward with community consultations and online discussions. And so what we have done is we've reviewed all those documents that are coming forward from the federal government that outline what they're intending to do with community consultations and the documentations that are online, and we find that there is some good news for the Northwest Territories, even though it is draft and nothing has been agreed upon. But they're really impressed with the work that we have been doing over that last multi-year agreement for Indigenous languages. There's quite a lot of really healthy and successful initiatives moving forward to revitalize languages, and so they realize that, and so they're placing in their documents the continued funding for 5.9 million at that draft level. Once again, we've been talking with our federal counterparts, with my federal counterpart, about as the federal government does come into the Northwest Territories to talk to the different languages group, if we can be a part of that, almost like a part of those negotiations, so we can really move forward as a cohesive, collaborative front for Indigenous language revitalization and service delivery. What I don't want to see happen, and I've expressed this viewpoint on many occasions is that 20 years ago for the Indigenous Languages Agreement, it was the same amount, 1.9 for the nine Indigenous governments. And that was right up until 2015. As a result of the negotiations in 2015-16, due to the work with the Secretary, we put forth a huge, big funding proposal for increased Indigenous language support, which resulted in very good news for Indigenous languages. Number one, we got a multi-year agreement, and number two, we got a $4 million increase from the 1.9. That was great news, and we profited from that increase in that multi-year status for 2017, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. Minister Simpson has indicated that that agreement has come to an end, and so we continue with the federal government in the negotiation of a one-year agreement. Now that makes me a little bit leery because I don't want to go into one-year agreements. That's why in the upcoming documentation, we hope we have in our back pocket on deck, we're not really content to sit with just 1 year again. We have, again, that same kind of proposal, that funding proposal for increased Indigenous language support that asks for more dollars, not only to continue the current successful projects, but to expand into the areas of more support for our Indigenous governments, more support for broadcasting and mentoring in broadcasting, more support for the adult immersion programs that we're anticipating. And as a result, we hope to move forward with the negotiations with the federal government, not only for that 1 year status that we have, 2021, but also for the negotiations for an increase asked for 2021 and onward. So that is coming right around the corner. It's fresh and coming from the back burner right to the front, and hopefully we could be successful with these kinds of negotiations that are happening with the federal government and where they stand with their monies moving forward at that federal level. Marcy, Minister Simpson. Sorry.
So thank you, Mr. Norn. Do you have a supplementary?
I do. Yeah, and yeah, thank you, Minister, for that response, and Dr. James for your response. I think it's important, for me, like I said, if the federal government wants to show their commitment, I think we need to see more longer-term commitments and not some of these piecemeal short-term commitments. I think if we can move in that direction, that would be really a good thing. And anyway, switching gears, my second question is looking at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, like the calls to action, like 13 and 14 on languages, and also looked at some of the previous reports, and one of the common themes I've seen from our official languages reports, and I don't know if there's any been movement on it. I don't want. Hopefully, the minister can or his staff can shed some light on it. Is the capacity development? You heard in the reports that they want more quality materials being distributed and resource centers. So I guess my question to the minister is, has there been any movement towards getting some of these things done, just following through in some of these asks from the communities? Mr. John.
Minister Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to go back and comment on something the member said in his previous comments about the need to replace speakers, because a lot of the speakers are older. We do see upticks in the number of speakers in younger ages now, and the 2019 data, hopefully we can get our hands on that soon, and hopefully that shows an even further increase, and it'll show that some of the efforts that we've undertaken to this point have been successful. But perhaps I can hand this off to Dr. James again. Thank you.
Dr. James,
Yes, Madam Chair.
Your replies a bit more condensed, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you might note, I get a little bit passionate on this topic. Thank you, Madam Chair. So essentially the capacity development and the resource development maybe I'll just provide one example, and that's the Our Languages curriculum. The capacity that we're developing with the training for the new, not only the new, but also the existing Indigenous language instructors is quite intensive as well as intentional. And the resource development for the Our Languages curriculum as well is very expanded, and the resources are many in terms of all sorts of resources that are necessary for Indigenous language learning. And those are all featured on Our Languages website, all of the books and resources and songs and resources that are necessary to learn Indigenous languages. That's just one example of the capacity and the resource development that's going on with the Secretariat and ECE. Marcy Cho.
Thank you. So if there's no other further questions, are there any other questions from anybody? No? I just want to make a couple of comments. Minister Simpson, I wanted to question, and if you would consider that you establish the interpreter training program under the Aurora College umbrella that we had many years ago, because I remember being at the college and there was like 30 students or 35 students in each class. And it was an incredible experience having those students at the college. And I'm wondering about that. I know you're putting into place a 2-year diploma program on an adult immersion program with a 3rd-year careers path, but the interpreter training program was one of the things that we were involved with before. So that is my question to you, Minister Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I'd have to look into, the numbers, but that's essentially what we're working for. We're working to be able to have an intake for programs such as that. And the situation right now is such that I think the need is the more revitalization part so that we could get more people ready for courses like that. I can ask my Deputy Minister to briefly add if she would like.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. So yes, just to build on what the Minister was saying, that's really what we're trying to do in a variety of different ways, is to try to build the number of speakers who have a basic proficiency in order to be successful. And for example, one example is the interpreter translator program. The idea of the diploma, just to expand on it a bit, the idea would be that there would be a foundational piece for the language speakers to ensure that they have a certain level of proficiency, and then look at a variety of different career paths. And one of those career paths definitely is an interpreter translator as one of them. Another career path that's much needed in the NWT, which we've already spoke about, is the number of JK-12 Indigenous language instructors and teachers in our schools. Thank you.
So, Mr. Simpson, I don't think that we're talking about the same thing. I think that she said their career path would be interpreters. I'm talking about a 2-year, I think it was a 2-year interpreter training program that was to be reestablished. Maybe you can just comment on that a little bit later, but I'll just finish what I have to say. One of the things that the retiring language commissioner made comments on during her presentation to us was, the English-French equality, that the Indigenous languages not have limited rights. So I just want to have your opinion on that, please, Minister.
Thank you. So in terms of the rights, I would say it's probably accurate that if you look at the Languages Act currently, there are rights established for French, such as access to services, and through the Supreme Court as well, such as access to services and the right for, or the requirement for government documents to be printed in English and French, and those aren't the same for the Indigenous languages. And I think that one of the concerns that has come out in communities in the past is to have the right to have every document into Indigenous languages taken away from revitalization into documents. It's a it goes to where it is, and Dr. James spoke about revitalize. We're at the point where we need to revitalize now, and be one where we have enough interpreters, we have enough language speakers that we will be doing everything in 11 official languages. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So just my last, we didn't get the whole thing because it was kind of, wasn't clear, but I mean, we could have a chat about that. But I think that one of the other things that the language commissioner stated was that we can't be making the official language, the official Indigenous languages, as in the Act, it says needs rather than rights. And I think some of those changes to the Act have got to have to be implemented in order to make it much stronger. Just like MLA O'Reilly has mentioned in his comments. I agree with that. The other thing I wanted to mention was that the Indigenous term comes from, it's been implemented federally. That's why we're using that term in the Northwest Territories now. Not everybody agrees with that term because there are some places, some people say there's rights-based and then there's other things, but it was the federal government that implemented the term Indigenous. So with that, if there's no other further questions, do you have any closing remarks, Minister Simpson? Lost them now. So we'll just close up, I guess. Okay. Let's just close the meeting. We'll close and go on to our meeting. So we have to take a few minutes break to get everything ready, eh? Okay.